Today I wish to celebrate John Lydon, a man who doesn't probably need anybody to celebrate him whatsoever, and yet I would like to honour the impact that he's had on my life and others through the course of the last half century or so. There are a few things that I want to honour him for in particular. I mean, from what I understand of his personal life, he's someone who overcame some obvious difficulties in earlier age due to the condition that he was born with, and he used that as a means to project himself even more boldly into the cultivation of a strong personality. And that then obviously left its mark on the punk scene, without which the modern world wouldn't be quite the same. He's someone who's always spoken forthrightly, and I must admit, as he ages, I don't know if I entirely agree with all of the things that he advocates and says, but what I do admire is his willingness to do so unequivocally, without any kind of apology. He says what he thinks boldly and clearly, and that's, in my opinion, a really, really wonderful character trait to admire in somebody. There are some little things that I really want to touch upon, and not so little. You know, it's fascinating to think that his rendition of God Save the Queen was number one, and yet was not allowed to be number one at the time of the Silver Jubilee. That's a really remarkable detail in British history, that in the 1970s, the system of the BBC and the royal aristocracy was able to just say, the largest number of people this week have bought this song, but we're just going to pretend that they didn't, because it's the Queen's Silver Jubilee. You know, it's a really, it makes the system that we live in show itself. And their willingness to then go and perform that on the River Thames on the day of the Silver Jubilee, and to get arrested for it, I think is also a very admirable protest. Again, allowing the British aristocracy and the British system to really show itself in the fact that it wasn't able to have, they say that when a dictator isn't able to see the funny side, if the jester in the court isn't able to make fun of the sovereign, it's troubled times for that kingdom. And it seems to me that goes, it goes way back, but certainly as far as the 70s, we can really see this clear line whereby the aristocracy is not able to make fun of itself. So I really admire that God Save the Queen moment. And another one that I really cherish, my older brother once forced me to sit down and watch. Now, there was a couple of documentaries that were made about the Sex Pistols, one by Julian Temple, which, as I understand it, was kind of commissioned by Malcolm McLaren, who very much guided the direction of that documentary. And then there was another one, I believe again made by Julian Temple many years later, which he felt was more like his version of the story, and was very much leaning on the testimonies of people like John Lydon, who, during the course of which, it was very poignant, my older brother made me watch that film, not only to learn more about what was going on in London. It begins in London in the 1970s, explaining the history out of which punk arose, what it was a response to. But then towards the end, he talks about his relationship with Sid Vicious, who he had been his best friend, who he managed to get into the band, but who did not cope with the life of a young famous rock star quite as well as John Lydon did, and found himself getting into the abuse of heroin, and it eventually cost him his life. And in the course of that film, John Lydon speaks nakedly about the impact that had on him. And seeing this very bold man crying, weeping, showing his humanity and his regret in the face of his role in what led to his best friend's demise is absolutely heart-wrenching. And it was a particularly sad connection to my own story, because my older brother that played me that film so that I would see the dangers and the impact of heroin eventually got entangled with the drug himself, and it cost him dearly. I don't know if it's what necessarily led to his death, but it certainly contributed to some very dark periods in his life. So I wish to honour John Lydon for his humanity, for his honesty, for his boldness, for his sense of humour, and for his voice, which just has this amazing quality. I remember when I was out partying in the 90s, hearing his song Open Up with Left Field, which just absolutely ripped apart the dance floor, giving this unbelievable punk element to the dance movement that could sometimes be seen as a bit robotic and a bit subdued and lacking that kind of sense of rebellion that punk embodied. Of course, there was Spiral Tribe and others who were very rebellious, Exodus, who were very rebellious in their manifestation of the dance music thing. And yet, there is still that kind of plodding, just carrying on quality, accepting things rather than questioning things. So for all of these and much, much more, I wish to honour today, on his birthday, John Lydon.